Ted Cruz went on Morning Joe, and he had an interesting back and forth with Joe Scarborough on economic policy. So let's listen, and then I'll tell you why this guy is more dangerous than I thought.
But a lot of people on Main Street are getting more and more concerned about big business, about crony capitalism, about the rich getting richer, about the poor getting poor, about too big to fail getting even bigger, about billionaires paying 14% tax rates while their secretaries are paying 28% tax rates. Will you talk about those issues? Do you talk about those issues? And how do people respond in the Republican primary?
Look, every one of those issues I talk about just about everywhere I go. I mean, I've said a lot of times, I think the biggest lie in politics is that Republicans are the party of the rich. The truth of the matter is the rich, big business, does great with big government. It gets in bed with big government. They have armies of lawyers and lobbyists and accountants. The top 1% today earn a higher share of our income than any year since 1928. What we've seen for the entire course of the Obama administration is the rich are getting richer. People who are doing well are doing even better, but working men and women, millions of people are hurting.
That's a 30-year trend. How do we reverse that?
Look, I think the only way to reverse it is to get back to booming economic growth. Growth is what drives everything, and growth comes from small businesses. 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses. And I try to approach every domestic issue through the prism of what I call opportunity conservatism, which is that we should focus like a laser on opportunity, on easing the means of ascent up the economic ladder. You know, I try to look at things from the perspective of my dad, who in 1957 came from Cuba with nothing and washed dishes making 50 cents
So
an hour.
give us an issue or two, a piece of legislation that the Cruz administration would push first to make sure that the rich didn't keep getting richer, the poor didn't keep getting poor, and the middle class didn't keep getting squeezed.
Look, what drives economic mobility is growth. And
right.
Two historic levers governing growth have been tax reform and regulatory reform.
Here's why this is really interesting and why I say that I think this proves that he's more dangerous than I thought he was. What he did there is a bait and switch. So he said to Joe Scarborough, yeah, I agree that income inequality is a major issue. I agree that we should focus on Main Street as opposed to Wall Street. Lobbyists are a big problem, et cetera, et cetera. But then he went on to propose policies that exacerbate those problems. He went on to give you the George W. Bush economic playbook. That's exactly what he gave you. His main solution was tax reform, which is just a code word for tax cuts for the rich, and deregulation. So in other words, do exactly what happened in the 1920s, for example, which led up to the stock market crash and the Great Depression. Do exactly what Ronald Reagan did, which led to growing income inequality, an increase in the debt and the deficit, and a big recession right when he left office, and do exactly what George W. Bush did, which of course led to the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession. So copy the thing that has failed time and time and time again. But as I tell you to do that, I'm going to give lip service to things that everybody agrees with in both parties. That's dangerous, man. That's scary. Because what this guy will do is he'll use his rhetoric to dupe over people who don't know any better. He'll, of course, dupe over the Republican base, but also, I fear, he's going to dupe over some people who would be considered centrist or moderate or who are swing voters and stuff like that. And he'll make them think, oh, yeah, Ted Cruz is looking out for us, and he's going after the people in big business and big government. And that's just not the case. Look at his record. I mean, you heard him. He ripped lobbyists in the 1% there. He gave you a statistic about the 1%, and he said, oh, big government and lobbyists work together, they're in bed together, and that's the problem. But what he doesn't tell you is that we've covered, 3-4 different stories of him where he's argued when Democrats try to do campaign finance reform and regulate the corruption and bribery and money in politics, he comes out and argues, look at these Democrats trying to take away your free speech rights. So he's fighting in the opposite direction as he tells you he's on your side. He goes out there and says, I'm with the people and fucking lobbyists and fucking big government. Meanwhile, not even behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, he argues in the next breath that, oh, these Democrats are trying to take away your free speech rights by limiting corruption and bribery and money in politics. this guy is a sleazeball. This guy can do some damage, man, because he's an old school kind of politician. He's the kind of politician that I don't think he thinks twice about lying. Like, there are a lot of politicians who I'm pretty sure they're just stupid. And they don't really mean bad. They have a ridiculous worldview, and they argue for it. I mean, off the top of my head, probably a guy like Jim Inhofe is really just dumb, and he really believes climate change is a hoax. Now, granted, he gets a lot of money from the oil industry, no doubt about that. But in the chicken or the egg situation, in his case, I think we know which one comes first, and it's the fact that he's dumb, and then he gets the money from the oil industry. So he's just a dunce. Rick Santorum's another guy who's genuinely, like, uber religious, and he's really stupid. So that's a different thing. With Ted Cruz, he's smarter than he's letting on, or at least it appears like on issues like this he is. Because he'll say one thing and then he knows what's really going on. And he has no gripes about lying. He's shameless in some of the stuff that he says. And then the final thing I'll mention here real fast is he talked about small business. That's where it's all at, man. That's where we need to help out the small businesses and do tax cuts over there. Well, that's actually an area where I agree. But guess what? So does Obama. And Obama cut taxes for small businesses over a dozen times in his first term alone. So all the stuff that, all the areas that it's actually intelligent to do tax cuts. So for small businesses, for example, or for middle class and poor people, I've never met a middle class or a poor tax cut I didn't like as a progressive. And a lot of progressives agree with me. Well, Obama's already proposed those tax cuts. Obama made, 90% of the Bush tax cuts permanent, and that 90% was just the 90% that was largely the middle class and the poor? So all the stuff that you think you do better and you think is actually an argument for the people, Obama's already done it, and progressives have already proposed it. You're just using it as a talking point to push through the agenda of the rich and the corporations and the elite. So this guy is a Trojan horse to the max. And it's the most comical thing I've ever heard when he said the biggest lie in politics is that the GOP is the party of the rich. It doesn't matter what you say, son. Your rhetoric is irrelevant on that because we could actually look at the facts. We can look at the data, and we see that under Republican administrations, they repeatedly cut the taxes of the rich. They repeatedly give subsidies to the rich. They repeatedly bail out the rich. They repeatedly do corporate welfare for ExxonMobil and Walmart and all the people who have money and don't need this extra advantage. Socialism goes to them when the Republicans are in power. That's a stone-cold fact. So to say that, no, the Republicans are not the party of the rich, that's absurd, and we can prove that it's incorrect. It's demonstrably untrue.